vast majority of Americans no longer have any direct connection with the source of their food, nor have the knowledge to produce it themselves. Join the movement to take the provision of our daily bread back into our own hands.
I'm Jake Klingensmith, beekeeper and instructor at the Plowshare. Today I'm going to show you how to start a hive. The best time of the year to start a hive is in the early spring. Here in Texas, that would be April. You'll want to order your bees in the late winter sometime in December because the beekeepers tend to sell out by March. So you'll want to place your order so that they can come in April. It's always very exciting when picking up your package of bees from the post office. And believe me, the postmaster will be just as excited to see them leave. Before we get started, we need to find a place for these bees to go. We need to look at a location for the hive. One of the first things to consider would be your neighbors. You don't want to set your hive up in a place where your neighbors' activities are going to affect the bees coming in and out of the hive. The next thing you want to look at is your activities. You won't want to place your hive where you're going to be mowing, rototilling, or making a lot of noise because that can oftentimes upset the bees. The next thing you want to consider is shade. Bees need shade, especially in the summertime. Here in Texas, it can get pretty hot, and the bees need that shade. They've got to keep the hive at 93 degrees, and if you've got it in the middle of the sun, it can get pretty hot, and those combs can start to get soft and melt. So you'll want to place it where they have shade most of the day. It's good to have some sun in the early morning, but shade is really good in the afternoon. So shade will be a big thing to consider. The next thing you're going to want to consider is elevation. You don't want to place your hive up on top of a hill where the wind will come and blow it over. That can be a big problem. Preferably, you would want to place them near some kind of windbreak. Another thing is you wouldn't want to place your hive in a little valley. You're really going to have to look out over the lay of your land. If you've got a dip in the land, oftentimes cold air will accumulate in those little dips, and as a result, the bees won't get out as early in the morning. For instance, bees fly at 55 to 57 degrees. And so if you've got a little dip in the land, the bees oftentimes will get stuck until that area starts to warm up, especially in the wintertime. When the frost comes through, you can have a hive freeze that's in a dip, but right next to it, if the hive is just up a little bit, elevated a little bit higher, then it won't take as high a risk of being frozen. Okay, this is the fun part. We've got our bees here, and the first thing we want to do is give them some little sugar water. Here I've mixed up some sugar and water. It's 50-50, 50% sugar, 50% water, and I'm just going to mist these bees. They've gone all the way from the beekeeper through the mail to you, and so they're a little worn out. And this will help kind of perk them up. Give them a good misting. You definitely don't want to drown them. Just give them a misting. It kind of calms them down, and it's kind of like a kid being thrown into some cotton candy. I'll set them to the side and we'll get the hive ready here. Okay, we want to take out 10 bars here. These bars here have a wax strip on it, and this is what the bees will build their combs from. It's just kind of a starter. This here is the divider board. This will keep them within that 10 bars space. You don't want to give them too much space. If you give them more than 10 bars space, they tend to build their combs crooked. They'll build them from front to back instead of from side to side on these starter strips. So you just want to give them 10 bar space. That'll also make it where they don't have to heat or cool so much of the hive. Bees in general have to keep their hive at 93 degrees. The way they do that is they intake sugar, which is a carbohydrate, and it's an energy, and so therefore their bodies produce heat. They'll all mass together and they'll vibrate their bodies, and this vibration will cause heat, and that's how they keep the hive warm. In the summertime, when the hive begins to get hot, the bees will all come to the entrance, they'll fan their wings and circulate air through the hive. If it gets really hot, they'll fly from the hive, they'll go dip in some water, they'll fly back, and they'll fan their wings over their wet bodies. This causes an evaporation, which cools them, which in turn cools the air that circulates through the hive. All right, we're ready to start to put these bees in. I will mist them down one more time with this sugar water. You see how they really calmed down from the first time I sprayed them? Here we've got a can here, and this is what the beekeeper filled with sugar water in order to feed them as they were being sent through the mail. We need to get that out. I'll shake the bees off. This is where they were eating from. And I'll spray some more sugar water in there. Okay, this little strap here has got the queen on it. She's in a cage just below that, so I'm gonna take that out. Okay, all these bees know that the queen is in there because she puts out a smell called pheromones that attracts all the bees to her cage. So I'll need to shake these bees off. Okay, here she is. First thing you'll want to do is check to see if your queen is healthy. This is a real nice, healthy queen here. Okay, this cage here has a cork on either end of it, and it's very important to take out the right cork. The cage has 3 little holes in it, and one of the holes is filled with something called candy. This candy is a very soft, kind of a, like a marshmallowy candy. The bees eat through that and release the queen out. These bees here came from several different hives. The beekeeper went around and he collected bees from different hives and he shook them down into this package, and he got 3.5 pounds of bees here. Then he went and he got a queen from a hive that he was raising queens in. This is how the beekeeper is able to ship bees to you, is by collecting them from different hives. So one of the important things here is to realize that these bees here are not familiar with this queen. And so the beekeeper has put some candy in this side of the cage here. The bees will eat through that candy, and during that time, they will get used to their new queen. They will familiarize themselves with her pheromones, and this will cause them to accept her. If she is released too soon, the bees will kill her. So it's very important to take out the cork on the candy end. If you take out the cork on the wrong end, she will be released too quickly. It takes about 24 hours for the bees to get used to their new queen. So just about the time that the bees are eating through this candy is about the time that they'll be used to their new queen. So let's take out this cork and let's do it on the candy end. One of the most common mistakes that a new beekeeper makes is forgetting to take out the cork. This isn't disastrous because you could always take out the cork a week later. But the sooner she gets out, the better. Now, we'll want to place this queen. We'll want a hanger between 2 bars. One very important thing to remember is you don't want your queen placed on the bottom of the hive. The bees cluster at night. They'll all cluster to the top of the hive at night to build comb, and therefore they'll just forget her down on the bottom. And she'll never get released. She may even starve to death. Okay. The other thing is I place her to the front here. Therefore, when I come back to check my hive here in a week to see how they're doing, I know that they're going to cluster around the queen, so therefore they're going to build their comb right on these first 2. It just helps me visualize where they're going to be when I go to open the hive next week. All right, now we're ready to start shaking the bees in. I usually take the sugar water and I'll mist them again. And then start dumping them in. As I'm dumping them in, I'll mist them down again. This is pretty close to 3,000 bees. We only estimate it, but it's about 1,000 bees per pound. You'll have a few bees that linger in the cage, but that's okay. I try to get most of them out. They don't like being shaken around like this, so they try to hang on to the edges. And if you work real quickly, I think you can get most of them out. Then I'll take this cage and I usually set it right next to the front of the hive. That way the last bees remaining in the cage, they'll be able to fly out and go into the hive itself. And then I'll mist them down with sugar water one more time. Now I'm going to brush whatever bees are on the outside into the hive. One of the things I'm looking for is I'm looking for bees that are going to put out a pheromone that tells all the rest of the bees that they're happy with this new location. Bees are always talking to each other through pheromones. Let's see here. Here we go. We've got some bees right here. They're fanning their wings, spreading that smell out. One of the important things about starting a hive is that you've got to feed them. These bees have nothing in this hive to eat, so anything that they store up is going to come from you. You've got to feed these bees. So we're going to feed them some sugar and water. That's primarily what they're going to eat when they start off. They need a lot of sugar water to build all that new comb. One important thing about the kind of sugar you use is that you want to use granulated sugar. You don't want to use powdered sugar. It contains cornstarch, which is really bad for the bees. You also wouldn't want to use honey because you don't know where it came from, and that's how you could easily spread diseases. What I usually do is I just fill a jar half with water, and then I'll fill it up the rest of the way with sugar. That's half sugar, half water. So I'm going to fill it up half full, and then I'm going to dump this sugar into it. On average, when you first start a hive, they usually take in the first quart in about 3 days. After that, as they begin to build up new comb, they'll take in about a quart every day. It's very important to feed your bees at least every 3 days for the first 3 weeks. I'll just stir and stir this sugar until it all dissolves in the water. This here is a feeder, and it'll go into the entrance of the hive. This is a lid that goes on the jar. It has all these little holes in it, and the bees will come crawl out of the hive, and they'll crawl into this feeder, and they'll crawl up to here, and they'll take out all the sugar water out of the jar through those holes. You'll want to take this feeder here and slide it in the entrance. And then put your quart of sugar water on it. These bees sure have a sweet tooth. One of the main reasons we would lose our hive is if we don't feed them enough. It's very important to feed your bees a lot. In the beginning, all they have to eat is what you're going to provide them. So oftentimes I overstress that you've got to feed your bees. And that's to your good. The more you feed them, the healthier the hive will be. I had one student come and take my class, and after taking the class, he went home and started his hive. With great excitement, he called me back 3 months later to tell me his bees were about to swarm. That meant that they had run out of room and half the colony was going to leave. I told him that couldn't be because his hive was just brand new. So I explained to him that he just needed to give the bees more room, move the divider board back, let these bees expand. He explained to me he had done that. I suddenly realized, well, yes, he'd moved his divider board back, but he wasn't understanding what I was saying. Give them more room. Yes, he'd given them more room. So I asked him, how many combs do you have in the hive? He said, 24. Huh. I said, 3 months and 24 combs? How often are you feeding them? He said, well, my son feeds them at 12 o'clock. I feed them at 1 o'clock. My wife gets up at 2 in the morning. No kidding. kidding. He was feeding them every hour. The bees will take in a jar every hour. Once they start building that comb, they will fill those combs up. They're not actually eating it as if we were eating breakfast. They're storing it within the hive. It was good that he was feeding them a lot. Yes, he had a very healthy hive, but you don't have to feed them every hour. You'll want to continue to feed them through their entire first year. After about 3 months, they'll empty the jar in about an hour's time. They're taking that nectar inside and they're storing it in the combs. That's all very good and very positive. So the more you feed them, the better they'll be. But you only have to feed them once a week after 3 months. So to summarize, you'll want to feed your bees a 50-50 sugar to water mixture. For the first 3 months, you'll want to feed your bees every 3 days. After that, for the rest of their first year, you'll want to feed them once a week. Okay, now we need to close the hive up. We'll want to leave these alone for the next week while the queen is being released. And they'll be building comb in there. We'll want to come back here in a week and check them to see how they're doing. We'll want to make sure the queen has gotten out. We'll want to make sure that they're all nice and healthy and built new combs.